five drives characterize Lyndon Johnson: a longing for universal approval and the desire to dominate all he undertakes. Says Vice President Hubert Humphrey.
President Johnson doesn't like failure. When he sends a message down to Congress, he expects the Congress to act on it.
I'm interested in the glories of art and architecture and the finer things of life and education, but I'm also interested in income taxes.
Press Secretary Bill Moyers.
It's not that he's tempestuous, it's that he's committed.
If rural manners sometimes assail the dignity of his office, they possess a certain charm. Witness Montana's Senator Mansfield.
I would say that President Johnson is a very real sentimentalist, and I think it comes out occasionally in his references to days gone by.
Because all my family's life, we've been paying out to the Pertinalis Electric Co-op. And tonight I could have had one meal on them without that stinking monthly minimum.
California's Senator Kuechel on his powers of persuasion.
I recall the manner in which he would consult with some of his Democratic colleagues in his Senate days by even taking hold of their lapels and talking to them very closely.
Again, Bill Moyers.
The painful thing about working for a man like President Johnson is that he so often is so much more right than you are.
A complex man in a complex role. This is the story of Lyndon Johnson. 7 days in the life of the president. Beside the lush banks of the Pedernales stands the home of a president. White shingle luxury, elaborate comfort, an oasis in the drought-worn land where only the river nurtures life. Unlike the sophisticated comfort of Kennedy's Hyannisport, this is Lyndon Johnson country, where survival demands toughness and a mind attuned to nature's hard logic. Abstract thought has no place here. Practical men, iron strong and mule stubborn, work these Texas hills and take pride in their ability to scrape life from played-out earth. Born here, raised here, the country idiom still colors his speech, his thoughts, his way of life. Work awaits him in Washington, and Lyndon Johnson's capacity for work outstrips most men, for he seems to believe what he lacks in intellectual depth can be made up in energy, action, and force of will. From a special landing strip on his ranch, helicopters take him on the first leg of his return. He leaves reluctantly, for this is home. Washington remains for Lyndon Johnson a remote and uncomfortable place. Big enough for 2 emperors, a pope, and a grand lama. So wrote Thomas Jefferson of the White House, for all the United States, the house of history. As they left their marks on the nation, so has each of the 34 presidents who lived here left some reminder of his tenancy. From Jefferson, who advised that its design be copied from the mansion of an Irish duke, to Johnson, who has ordered that its interior be decorated with austere simplicity. The mansion, criticized by Congress in 1790 for being too big, was soon too small, and in 1909, Theodore Roosevelt added a west wing so that the president might have a place to work. And through half a century, the simple Oval Office has become to all the world symbol of the nation's strength, her focal point of power. "1,600 people work on the president's staff. By 9 a.m., most of them have checked into the White House or the executive office building next door. Since the beginning, White House doors have been open to the public, but only in modern times have peddlers and favor seekers been banned from wandering the halls. An average of 10,000 tourists a day pass through. Few see Lyndon Johnson, unlike Lincoln's day, when the president met them in what he called public opinion paths. Between tourists and official receptions, the lower floors of the White House literally ring with sound. By practice and tradition, the mansion has been the domain of the president's wife. Here, the First Lady fulfills her obligation as arbiter of Washington society and brings this classic complaint from Lyndon Johnson. When you're trying to take a nap, he says, Lady Bird is in the next room with Lawrence Rockefeller and 80 ladies talking about daffodils on Pennsylvania Avenue. In the president's day, 7 to 9 a.m. pass in the mansion living quarters, where his activities and guests are off the record, and he can study the night's report from the White House Communications Center. In the West Wing, 3 of his 5 secretaries prepare the mountain of paperwork that awaits the president. Anticipating his arrival, special assistants like former advertising man Jack Valenti set the order for items they wish the president to see. There's barely time now for Bill Moyers, special assistant, doubling as press secretary, to make one last check of the news wires. Word is passed. He's on the way. Only now the lights go on.
Now or in the future that excites me more, or benefits the nation I serve more, or makes the land and all of its people better and wiser and stronger, or anything that I think means more to freedom and justice in the world than what we've done with this education bill. But you take it from me, I worked harder and longer on this measure than any measure I've ever worked in since I came to Washington in 1931.
Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal opens Lyndon Johnson's eyes to the power of big government. These are the influences that shape his way. He sees the hardships of Depression-dazed America, footloose people wandering his native Texas in search of necessities, and becomes convinced that the cure rests in Washington, in the hands of federal administrators. And there is the influence on Lyndon Johnson of canny Mr. Sam Rayburn, Speaker of the House, and one of the most adroit politicians of his day. From Mr. Sam, Johnson learns the secret of controlling the intricate machinery that makes Congress run. As Senate Majority Leader, he samples power and finds it sweet. The agonizing helplessness of his role as observer of John Kennedy's struggles with a truculent Congress, this too leaves its mark. The bleak, parched earth of Texas is remembered best of all. Initiative made possible his escape, but his compassion goes deep for those left behind, and his conviction is strong that only great government can lift from them the oppressive burden of the land. In the early spring of 1965, Lyndon Johnson had recommended to Congress a tidal wave of legislation, each bill a vital part of the Great Society. He is determined to shepherd them safely through their crucial early life on Capitol Hill. Well aware that of all political maneuvers, the most delicate is presidential participation in the legislative process. He dictates strategy in his weekly meetings with congressional leaders. Old pros at this business, they share intelligence he receives from White House legislative aides prowling Capitol Hill. In emergencies, the vice president or the president himself steps in. Sometimes a phone call sways a vote. Sometimes a commitment of support for a long-cherished project. In private interview, face-to-face confrontation, he is the master of legislative give and take. From Defense Secretary Robert McNamara down, The president relies on personal contact to accomplish his aim. The waiting rooms of the Oval Office are always full, but the public rarely learns the names of daily visitors. For if it were released that one senator met with the president, his fellow senators would have to be accorded the same privilege or risk a loss of prestige. These are proud and independent men, and they jealously guard their role in the Congress. Lyndon Johnson knows this well. He understands their problems, caters to their vanities, and prods them quietly, while publicly roaring their praise. The president still follows each bill through the Congress, but there is less arm-twisting and application of his personal persuasion. For these methods, though quick to succeed, are the most likely to boomerang. Always the lines of personal communication are open. To Dean Rusk, Secretary of State, there is a link dating to Lyndon Johnson's time as Vice President, when Rusk, on his own initiative, kept Johnson fully informed on U.S. foreign affairs. This, a grateful president remembers. Rusk shares a common Southern background with the president. Not so with another foreign affairs advisor, McGeorge Bundy, a coldly brilliant Eastern intellectual. In every respect of personality, he differs from Lyndon Johnson. But the president relies on Bundy's ability to digest reams of information and present immediately succinct recommendations. One other man completes Johnson's triumvirate of advisors on foreign affairs, Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, the ruthlessly efficient administrator of the once unwieldy Pentagon. He is often called the most brilliant of the three. For all of them, there is one problem that has dogged them from the beginning: Vietnam.
Secretary McNamara and Ambassador Lodge will be leaving tomorrow evening for Saigon. When they return next week, we will give careful consideration to their recommendations, as well as those of Ambassador Taylor and General Westmoreland, and we will do what is necessary. Heavy infiltration of North Vietnamese forces has created new dangers and difficulties in South Vietnam. Increased aggression from the North may require an increased American response on the ground in South Vietnam.
So a crisis begins. The urgent request for men and supplies from Vietnam hastens the moment of hard decision. Wistfully in these days, he recalls the White House order to Dwight Eisenhower in World War II. Seek out the German army and destroy it. But the fighting in Vietnam is not that simple. Every alternative, from retreat to all-out war, bears grave risk. It is small comfort that here in this room, Franklin Roosevelt faced war's reality. Harry Truman weighed commitment in Korea, and John Kennedy conceived the Cuban blockade. Like Wilson, Lincoln, Madison, and McKinley, they have known the solitary anguish of Lyndon Johnson's coming days. Over the years, the White House has developed into one of the world's most important sources of news. And for the reporters covering this exalted beat, the outer lobby of the West Wing is refuge and domicile. The president's office is 20 paces beyond the far door, but at times it might be 1,000 miles away. For shielded by the wall, newsmen rarely learn more than the president wants them to know. All is well if the stories they file are favorable, but reports carrying criticism can bring angry personal rebuttal from the inner office.
Briefing. Briefing. Oh, let's go. Briefing. Let's go.
The call comes at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. each day. Briefing time for the White House press. Bill Moyers makes the announcements of White House activity that form a part of the next day's news. As interim press secretary, his honesty and integrity strengthened the president's relations with the press. One problem remains: the president's contention that public criticism of his programs is not in the national interest. The press secretary is referee and peacekeeper in this running battle. For Moyers, the measure of success is the public's acceptance of the president and the programs of his administration, reflected in opinion surveys like the Gallup poll.
I'd like to see them get over there and really bomb those communists, show them that America means business.
That's hard to say.
I don't know. I hope we come out for the best, of course.
Disapproval irks the president, according to most White House observers. When it's reflected in slight drops in public opinion, he turns accusingly to the press and indicates that they have been somehow remiss in their reporting. If he is larger than life in other matters, if he works harder, talks longer, acts quicker than most, in his desire for approval, reporters find Lyndon Johnson most human. He goes to bed late and rises early, and the words I never heard him say are, "I'm tired." So says Jack Valenti, perhaps somewhat ruefully. For presidential assistants, simply keeping up with their boss is a grueling experience. Always on call, their work days may stretch into 18 or 20 hours, punctuated by explosive outbursts of impatience, with anything less than total dedication. There is one presidential duty that has bedeviled every chief executive since George Washington: greeting the ceremonial visitor. The need to celebrate these meetings has given rise to the one-minute White House scrimmage. Photographers and newsreel cameramen covering the president are rushed into the Oval Office as the ceremonial visit comes to an end, and given 1 minute to take their pictures. In an already full calendar, more than the minute crowds the schedule, and these are, after all, less than crucial encounters, yet part of a presidential day.
Lights, please. That's all, gentlemen. I'm sorry, that's all their time. Thank you very much. This way out.
Still another ceremonial activity requires presidential participation: the swearing in of key government officials. New cabinet members, agency chiefs, and ambassadors are honored in these routine affairs, calling for a presidential speech followed by the oath of office. Quietly, almost unnoticed, the men who served the Kennedy administration have been replaced by Johnson appointees. The continuity of government has gone unbroken, due in part to this graceful transition.
I am again this morning very grateful to Governor Collins for this unselfish demonstration.
To office now have come individuals with whom Lyndon Johnson feels the great personal rapport so vital to his administration. Experts in their fields, they have direct access to the president, rather than through the system of White House intermediaries preferred by President Kennedy.
And to thank him for this new role of service.
If there is one distinguishing feature, it is their willingness to work anonymously, be background figures to Johnson's starring role. He carefully selects men who know the intricacies of Capitol Hill and get along well with congressmen. And they prove their value by paving the way for overwhelming legislative achievements. These victories, Lyndon Johnson salutes with unabashed vigor.
Represents the single most important breakthrough in the last 40 years. And you haven't seen anything yet.
To Vice President Hubert Humphrey, the reasons for success are clear.
And I can honestly say that the members of the 89th Congress have been to the White House more in 6 months than some senators and congressmen have been to the White House in 16 years or 20 years.
To Senator Thurston Morton, the dangers of success are many.
Is the Great Society the answer? Is not the President setting in motion forces that will destroy the American society? I grant his arm-twisting skill in pushing them through the Congress.
I am a child of the Congress. For more than 30 years, the Hill was my home. And I am here tonight among those that I know and those that I respect and those that I love.
As he carves the great society, he finds far more controversy over his method than the results. Though critics talk of socialization, existing measures of approval and popularity show him far ahead of his detractors.
We are going to bring you back gains for your sacrifice here tonight, gains that you and your children will be proud of. Thank you.
He cannot match his domestic achievements with success in foreign affairs. Though he tries to use them, the same methods don't work. The luster of his accomplishments is dimmed by the war that rages in Vietnam. It forces him to dissipate his energies and those of his government. Even now, he faces renewed problems. Ahead, 7 days of presidential crisis. In the innermost sanctum, the private presidential dining room, 4 men discuss Vietnam's agonizing alternatives. Rusk, McNamara, Bundy, and Lyndon Johnson. In the last week of July 1965, the situation is bleak. Politically and militarily, the United States is losing. Within 7 days, action must be taken. They must choose between 2 alternatives. One is fire in the sky, commitment just short of total national emergency, and the other is a low-key buildup of the men and materials needed to stem the Viet Cong tide. Between these, he must choose. Word goes out through the West Wing offices. The president wants to talk. He wants expert advice, and his aides begin arranging off the record meetings with government officials, foreign affairs experts, military men. In short, all those whose judgment in these affairs he trusts. The conferences will have a dual purpose: to elicit a broad range of opinion and to secure unanimous agreement on whatever alternative is selected. Some term the method government by consensus, for its design is to produce a united front on crucial matters. A new atmosphere pervades the long, rambling walks with reporters around the South Lawn. The talks are off the record, and in the course of them, the president uses newsmen as sounding boards, trying to sense the pull of public opinion from the content of reporters' questions. Veterans of other Johnson crises know this and try to sense his mood in the inflection of his voice, the tempo of his step. His world is one of practical politics, with its inherent spirit of compromise and exchange. There is none of the abstract moralizing that now troubles him. So 2 days will pass in the 7 days of crisis. It is almost impossible to clear the official calendar of appointments scheduled months in advance. Receptions with foreign emissaries cannot be canceled without harming U.S. prestige. However burdened, the president must fulfill these long-standing obligations. Time is running out. With the necessity for decision pressing him, the reception line is used as a means to pass an important message to the president by McGeorge Bundy. Some men are quick to decide, slow to act. This has never been the case with Lyndon Johnson. He is primarily a man of action, but this decision he ponders long. To the muffled tempo of the news ticker, more and more the line of discussion favors fire in the sky. In effect, a presidential declaration of a state of emergency. But even from his closest advisors, the president withholds commitment. I'm going, he says, to Camp David. Lyndon Johnson seems resigned to the necessity of fire in the sky. But just before going, he has told aides, I got just a little weak spot in my stomach. His doubts must be resolved during a weekend at the peaceful retreat in Maryland's Catoctin Mountains. far from reporters, cameras, and the normal pressures of government. Behind him in Washington, a bulky bureaucracy concentrates its efforts on maintaining a flow of digested information toward the pinnacles of government. In the operations center of the State Department, wires from embassies all over the world carry summaries of foreign reaction to the problem of Vietnam. Some critics say that the State Department has become little more than an information center under Dean Rusk, that his inability to make decisions has produced weakness down the line. In addition, memoirs of President Kennedy's associates, published during this period, hint at Kennedy's disenchantment with Rusk. McNamara, the fact and figures man, prepares to join the president. Philosophically, little separates him from Rusk and Bundy. All of them earned their spurs under Kennedy in the Cuban crisis. Monday morning, 4 days since the start of the crisis period. Bill Moyers announces the president's intention to hold an important press conference in less than 48 hours on Wednesday morning. There are no further details. He can give no indication of what the president plans to say, for no decision has been reached at Camp David.
I hereby resign from my position as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States in order to assume the responsibility.
On this Monday, Arthur Goldberg takes office as ambassador to the United Nations. It is a tribute to the president's persuasive powers that he has convinced Goldberg to resign from the Supreme Court to take the post. Once appointed, few men in history have stepped down from the bench.
I do so only at your insistence and in the belief that no good American could, in good conscience, refuse the new duty you have requested me to undertake.
As the ceremony ends, in view of guests and reporters, the president makes it a special point to kiss Mrs. Rusk. It is a gesture of support for a Secretary of State that speaks far more eloquently than words. It is pure Johnson, a strange mixture of loyalty, sentiment, bravado, and humanity. Through the private entrances to the White House comes a steady stream of visitors to meet singly and in groups with the president. The experts. The president listens, estimates what each alternative will mean. Politically, to allies, to neutrals, to the Soviet Union and China, and gives no indication of which he favors, lest it cause advisors to swing in his direction. With the possibility of widespread troop commitment, perhaps even the declaration of a national emergency, the attention of the entire nation focuses on the White House. Gestures of support commingle with anguished protest. On Wall Street, always a barometer of national reaction, activity dwindles. Trading reflects confusion, an uncertainty of direction. For if the president pulls all the stops and does mobilize on a full wartime basis, most market forecasts will have to be totally revised. By 9 o'clock Tuesday evening, the last of the meetings have ended, the last of the experts gone. With his personal staff, the president reviews the factors that have brought him to decision. But the process is inexplicable, and those close to him know it. Their role now is to help him formulate the thoughts that will go into his speech of explanation tomorrow. It will take till early Wednesday to complete a workable draft of his talk.
Why
200 reporters make the short journey from the West Wing to the East Room of the White House. The press conference, once their private domain, is now a public institution. They have become reconciled to television's clutter as a part of their work. But as they gather, there is a feeling of tenseness, a feeling of crisis.
My fellow Americans, not long ago I received a letter from a woman in the Midwest. she wrote, "Dear Mr. President, in my humble way, I am writing to you about the crisis in Vietnam. I have a son who is now in Vietnam. My husband served in World War II. Our country was at war. But now, this time, it's just something that I don't understand. Why?"
In 2 days of meetings, withdrawal had gone unconsidered. Whatever their personal objections, senators, military experts, and diplomats agreed finally to quietly but substantially increase United States commitment. And this is what he wanted. Council first, unanimous accord later, with no look back nor recrimination.
Why must young Americans, born into a land...
Who can say why a president decides? Perhaps because he was a Texas Hill country boy, because he knew hunger, because he coveted power, or because he sought universal approval, or for a dozen such reasons. He has absorbed fact, advice, information, subjected them to the force of his emotions and intellect, and produced a decision, because he holds a lonely mandate freely given. He is president, and he must decide.
We have learned at a terrible and a brutal cost that retreat does not bring safety, and weakness does not bring peace. And it is this lesson that has brought us to Vietnam.
And when it is over, he reaches out for support in the way of all men. He rarely leaves the White House, cares little for Washington in general. But after 2 weeks of confined and concentrated work, the temptation to break loose becomes irresistible. And so he does.
To give my personal testimony in behalf of the newspaper men and newspaper women that they're doing very well in our own White House physical fitness training program on our daily walks. We've had very few casualties. We've lost 1 or 2 high heels, had 1 or 2 dropouts, but generally speaking, the marks are high. Give me a little more time, and both the press and I hope the president will be in better shape.
The blessings are upon you all the livelong day. The eyes of Texas are upon you. You cannot get away. Soon I think you can escape them from night till early in the morn. The eyes of Texas are upon you.
Lyndon Johnson cannot resist responding to such a display of affection. His hands bear scars from years of enthusiastic response to crowds. They need only welcome him to be welcomed in return. There is no surer sign of restlessness than the president's sudden decisions to break routine and pay an unscheduled call at one of the departments. The stir and excitement of a presidential visit ripples through giant agencies like the Commerce Department with earthquake-like tremors. The hall suddenly filled with excited government workers hoping for a glimpse of the president. As all presidents, Lyndon Johnson has sought this role, so he cannot complain of its rigors. he has assumed great personal control of the apparatus of government. And so the demands on his time and energy rise. The enormous pressures of schedule, problems, and decision burden his mind.
The architect of opportunity in America, the President of the United States.
I believe that he's running our country into a welfare state.
These force increases are required to meet the very substantial increases in the communist forces that have occurred over the last several months.
Air Force Base in Washington, a specially fitted jet transport waits on the President's command. The call has come, "Scepter, this is Crown, he's on the way." And to those manning the jet, it means the President's helicopter has left the White House. Soon he will be Texas-bound aboard Air Force One, the name given any plane that carries the President. Out of sight, above the field, circles the Angel, the name given a helicopter loaded with rescue equipment that hovers nearby whenever the President arrives. Should the terrible unforeseen occur, its presence can mean the difference between life and death. Aboard Air Force One, a precision countdown has begun. It is considered a matter of pride to pilots and crewmen that they can be ready to move the instant the President is on board. And that's the way Lyndon Johnson likes it. In most cases, the elapsed time from the moment he enters the plane until it taxis is 10 seconds. After a Texas-style lunch, chili, a turkey sandwich, and a cup of soup, work goes on aboard Air Force One. Staff members rush to complete work on press releases, memos, and mail in order to leave free time for the President once they reach Austin. Wherever he goes, the sense of strength goes too. No president, one observer has written, has so gathered to himself the power of government. He has his finger on every lever back in Washington, and that's what he cares about. 2.5 million pieces of mail a year arrive at the White House. But to reach the President, a letter must come through a long screening process. If it is presented to him, it often carries a staff note suggesting alternatives for action that may be required. Once the suggestion is accepted, or comment written and initialed LBJ, it becomes a command order. It happens about 2.5 hours out of Washington. It is something that is felt rather than seen. The atmosphere in the plane changes. He's coming home. Of this place, Lyndon Johnson's father had said, "I like to come home to the hills. Here's where they know when you're sick. Here's where they care when you die." Texas hills produced a man who laughs hard and hurts deeply. He gives extravagant praise and expects it in return, demands loudly and accomplishes much. Either loved or hated, his presence is felt. On a Texas Sunday, friends come to visit, and the tight-lipped look disappears. The somber mood of the past week slips visibly away. Plain manners and country grace are hallmarks of the Johnson style. In Washington, there is a feeling that the elegance has gone from high places. But this is the way of life, the society Lyndon Johnson prefers. There are still occasional ceremonial duties to be taken care of. But here in Texas, they have a different flavor than at the White House. Speeches for the benefit of the television newsreels sometimes produce odd sights.
Judge Jones, who is a longtime personal friend of Judge Thornberry's and a former partner of his. Homer and Eloise have been with us the last few days while they went through the necessary constitutional requirements.
Raised in a land of extremes, Lyndon Johnson is a man of extremes. He possesses great compassion and a savage temper. Warmth and generosity alternate with the tyrant's harshness. The land has shaped him. And when he seeks ideas or inspiration, he returns here. This is the one great theme that runs through all he does, and all that is Lyndon Johnson.
When I was young, poverty was so common that we didn't know it had a name. And education was something that you had to fight for. And water was really life itself. It is now my opportunity to help every child get an education and every American citizen have an equal opportunity to help every family get a decent home and to help bring healing to the sick and dignity to the old. That is what I've lived for. That's what I've wanted all my life since I was a little boy. And I do not want to see all those hopes and all those dreams of so many people for so many years now drowned in the wasteful ravages of cruel wars. And I'm going to do all I can do to see that that never happens.
The cycle begins anew. Lyndon Johnson returns to Washington, to the seat of his administration and the source of his power. John F. Kennedy had written, "The American presidency is a formidable, exposed, and somewhat mysterious institution. It is formidable because it represents the point of ultimate decision in the American political system. It is exposed because decision cannot take place in a vacuum. The presidential office is the vortex into which all the elements of national decision are irresistibly drawn. And it is the measure of Lyndon Johnson that this is where he wants to be."
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.